First, though, it's time for the international papers, and Elena is here on set. The election result, Elena, delayed in Egypt. What are the press making of that?
Well, Robert Fisk, the Independent's veteran foreign correspondent, says it looks suspiciously like it might be a move on the part of the army to give them time to effectively rig the election results before they're officially announced. He reckons they may be trying to massage them a little to put Ahmed Shafiq up on top. Of course, both camps have declared their man as won, with about 51–52% of the vote, very close indeed then. And he also suggests those Mubarak health rumours that we heard over the last couple of days might also have been cooked up by people close to the former regime to either distract the public from the vote counting going on, or alternatively to try and get Mubarak transferred to better hospital conditions. Of course, now apparently he slipped over in the bath, but Robert Fisk says all of that information is a little bit suspect anyway. So he reckons we're just seeing more and more of a military power grab going on in Egypt, and that whoever wins, there will be protests on the streets. But if the army attempt to manipulate the result and then say that Shafiq has won, we could really see a summer of enormous unrest in Cairo, he says. The Arabist, the Egyptian blogger Sandra Al-Amrani, is interestingly looking at the US role being played in Egypt there, saying we shouldn't forget how important to the Egyptian military US aid is, cash aid. Egypt has always been one of the biggest recipients in the world of US aid. Under Mubarak, it was the biggest after Israel. And the US is still doling out that money despite the army's attempts to grab power and their kind of constitutional coup that went on at the weekend. And the Arabist, the blogger, has written a passionate appeal today saying Barack Obama must stop this aid because he's effectively endorsing the army's bad behaviour.
Talking of US involvement abroad, rumours it's decided to take a new track on Syria.
This is the Guardian's front page. Britain and US willing to offer Assad clemency if he engages in talks. The analysis inside the paper calls this an almost totally futile attempt, a very long shot dependent on Russian support and smacking of desperation. But apparently Britain and the US are willing to offer Assad safe passage to a conference in Geneva where they hope he would meet the Free Syrian Army and representatives of the opposition. Of course, he's under a UN travel ban, so that would have to be temporarily suspended. And they may then be willing to offer him immunity from prosecution. Highly controversial, obviously. Lots of people think he should be referred to the International Criminal Court after 15,000 people have died in 15 months. But pragmatic diplomats, apparently, in both Britain and the US think that maybe they would be willing to offer him immunity if he'll talk about this. But then others saying that really Assad isn't living in quite the same world as the rest of us. These kind of diplomatic channels aren't going to work with a man who has made the conflict so much worse in his country that now full-on artillery barrages and helicopter gunships have become the norm in that conflict.
No, a story we've been talking about all week, in fact, the European tour of Aung San Suu Kyi. You've been looking at some of the press reaction. Yes,
there's a rather critical piece in Foreign Policy. Now, they're not entirely critical. They say that, of course, she's on this European tour to receive her Nobel Peace Prize in Sweden. Yesterday, she received an honorary degree from Oxford, and there's no one who deserves those accolades more, they say, after her long fight for democracy in Burma. But we shouldn't forget that her struggle is far from over. She hasn't had anything to say, really, on this tour about the conflict currently going on in Burma between the Muslim Rohingya group who've long suffered discrimination. They're not proper Burmese citizens. They've been attacked on numerous occasions by the army. Now they've got a conflict going on with local Buddhist people who are backed by the army. Dozens have died recently. She said nothing about that. And the Foreign Policy says she's walking a very difficult, thin political tightrope now that she's agreed to enter the Burmese parliament. She has to keep using it as a platform to speak out against the government.
And finally, the WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange, is all over the front of the British press.
Yes, of course, this is because he's taken refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy, what the Times calls the end of a long and wearisome legal farce, saying they hope Ecuador gives him up quickly. The Independent's journalist covering the story decided to take a rather novel approach. He went to the Ecuadorian embassy and tried to take refuge there himself, saying, how exactly does one claim refuge then at an embassy in London? The Ecuadorian embassy turned him away, saying, we're so busy at the moment, you'll have to come back next week. But they admitted this is the first time everyone's tried to pull this off in the London embassy. They tend to get people doing the other way around, rather people refuging themselves in British embassies all over the world. So Assange's case that Sweden is a less safe place to be than Ecuador doesn't really hold up.
Elena, thanks very much. Elena with the international papers here on France Bank.